for being here this afternoon. My name is Amy Fiore. I am the director of the Nonprofit Help Desk, and it is such a pleasure to be able to offer these types of programming for this type of programming for you. The Nonprofit Help Desk is a program of the JCC of Greater Coney Island. We provide free live workshops on a variety of topics, including how to sustain, whether you are eligible for, and how to manage your discretionary funding contracts with New York City. We have a number of those. We also are working on providing you with as many capacity building topics that we possibly can to help you effectively run your nonprofit organization. You will receive a survey after a few days after this. We want to hear from you. We want to know if this was helpful to you. We want to know what other topics you want to hear about. So please be sure to fill that out. If you go to our website, and I'm going to direct you there for a couple different things, the first thing that you can find is the archive of our past workshops. We're working on a search function, but it's pretty easy to scroll through them. If you have an idea, a question on a topic, and you want to ask us about it, you can also, we often direct folks to the archive of our workshops to get a little more information on a topic. We also have an active LinkedIn community. Please follow us there and engage in conversation. And then last but certainly not least, we have free expert support for New York City-based nonprofit organizations. You are coming in today from outside of New York City. This is for you. You're in the right spot. And currently we have funding to provide one-on-one expert consultation on a variety of topics for New York City organizations. Again, at nphd.org, you have a form there that you can fill out to request one-on-one support. Please be specific in the kind of request that you have so that we can pair you with the right person. Again, we also might then redirect you back to a different workshop just so that we start with a common understanding, and then we can dive into really specific issues and questions that you might have to run your organization. We have, for the next several months, a number of workshops coming up basically every other week. So again, NPHD, check that out. Very grateful to our funders, generous support from the New York City Council and from our friends at Sobel Bixel. Thank you all for that. And without any further ado, I hand it over to Yisrael Shulman, who's going to be addressing our topic today on best practices for board meetings. Mr. Shulman.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've worked very proudly with the Nonprofit Help Desk for a number of years now. I am the consulting attorney, and I help with nonprofits in terms of government, in terms of organization. I help to form nonprofits. I help to make applications to the Internal Revenue Service. I help with board governance issues and best practices. And today's topic is annual meetings. And some practices, some do's and don'ts for annual board meetings. I think the first thing we need to talk about is that there is a legal requirement for every New York State nonprofit organization, whether or not you're incorporated either under the nonprofit corporation law or the religious corporations law or the education law. There is a mandate for at least on a minimal basis for one annual meeting of the board of directors. And if you're a membership organization or board of trustees, I will use during this presentation directors and trustees interchangeably. They basically mean the same thing. And there's also, and if you're a membership organization, you have to have an annual meeting for your members as well. I thought the first thing we should really talk about, just taking it a step further, is some basic board member responsibilities. And I want to talk about 10 basic board member responsibilities. The first is that it's the role of the board to determine the organization's mission and purpose. It's the role of the board. Ina, I'm sorry, just a technical thing. Ina, all I see, can you close the screens, Ina, so that I'm not seeing people? Just want to see the names.
What screens?
Hold on, please. I'm so sorry. something. Guys, give me a break. Sorry. What do you see on your screen?
I
We
see the
We see your
presentation.
slide. We see your slide.
You see my slide?
Yes,
Terrific.
And we see
Hold
you.
on.
Yeah.
I don't, so give me a second, please. 1 second, everyone. Apologize. You see the slide though, correct?
yes.
Okay, I no longer have access to the slide, so I need to get that back up for some reason. Sorry, everyone. Apologies. Sincere apologies. I don't see the slide. So
Would you
I
like me
can't
to open
manipulate
them
it.
up?
1 second, please. 1 minute, please. Lost my thing. Okay, I'm back, everyone. I have my technical assistant here. Can you make the slide bigger? I'm in the middle of the presentation. I made it smaller by mistake.
I need you to stop sharing.
Stop share?
Why is this sharing? What's this?
I don't know what that is. Nonprofit logo. Go to
I
share.
don't know. No, I don't know what this is. Why is this there? You don't have your PowerPoint open.
I don't have a PowerPoint open.
Not showing up here.
Ina, you know what we're going to do, Ina? Ina, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you open up the PowerPoint and I'll just tell you when to turn the pages?
Yep.
I don't know.
I only have it as a PDF.
That's completely fine.
Okay.
So it's okay. So let's go to 10 basic member responsibilities.
1 second.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. So let's start again. 10 basic board member responsibilities. The first responsibility of the board members are to determine the organization's mission and purpose. It is the board member's responsibility to create and review, at least on an annual basis, a statement of mission and purpose that clearly articulates the organization's goals and who the primary constituents of the organization are. That is the quintessential purpose of and responsibility of a board member. The second responsibility of a board member is to choose who is the chief executive, who's going to be the top paid professional of the organization. In determining that, the board should determine what are the chief executives. It could be called an executive director, the CEO. Sometimes, depending upon the structure of the organization, it could be called the president of the board. And the responsibility of the board is to select that person, generally and hopefully after a careful search, to find the most qualified individual for the position. And then also to articulate what are the responsibilities of that board member, of the chief executive. Third responsibility is to provide proper financial oversight. The board must assist and should assist in developing the annual budget of the organization and ensuring that proper financial controls are in place. Later on during this presentation, I'm going to talk about financial statements and providing financial statements to the board and what those financial statements should look like and the frequency. But for right now, I want to make it clear that it is the responsibility of the board to provide general oversight of the finances of the organization. The fourth responsibility, which is usually the most touchy, is to ensure adequate resources. That doesn't mean the board has to dig into their pockets and provide the money to run the organization. But what it does mean is that the board has to make sure that the organization itself, whether it's the executive director or a chief development or officer, that there's some kind of plan in place for the organization to raise the funds or to obtain the necessary volunteers in order to carry out the mission of the organization. The next responsibility is to ensure that there's that all legal compliance and accountability is maintained, that the organization operates at the highest possible standards of legal and ethical integrity. And in terms of that, there's no better organization than the Nonprofit Help Desk. As mentioned at the beginning of the session, I'll just mention it again, since I understand that people have entered a little bit late. We have a robust website with many different sessions that talk about how to operate and how to run an organization. And I encourage everyone to browse those sessions and to take advantage of the resources available through the Nonprofit Help Desk. The next is to ensure effective organizational planning. The boards must actively participate in overall planning process and assist in implementing and monitoring whatever plan is created. Okay, turn to the next slide, please. The seventh I call is recruit and orient new board members, and also to provide a board assessment. All boards have a responsibility to articulate the prerequisites for candidates to join, you're going to recruit to join the board, to orient new board members, and to periodically and comprehensively evaluate the board's own performance. Boards do this in a number of different ways. Usually, I would recommend once a year, the board on its own, without staff members present, discuss how's it going? What do we think? What can we do? What can we as board members do to help further and bolster the mission of the organization? Are there specific types of board members that we should be looking for to enhance our ability to effectively manage and oversee the operations of the nonprofit? Way of example, a few weeks ago, I consulted with a nonprofit, and they have, and if you look at my number 8 here, my number 8 is enhance the organization's public standing. This organization does not feel that they are recognized in the community enough. So after consultation, we looked at the makeup of the board, and they came to realize they really had nobody on the board who had any kind of marketing, any kind of community relations, any kind of advertising background, and they decided that the next candidate for the board that they're going to look for is somebody that has that type of background, so they can help advise both the chief executive officer of the organization as well as the board in general about different ideas and what the organization can do to inform the community. And the community could be whether it's community people and the community members, it could be government officials who have the opportunity to provide funding, it could be funders or foundations, but in general, how to enhance that organization's public standing. The ninth of what I call my 10 key board member responsibilities is that the board has an obligation to set policy and to set policy. And by set policy, I mean determine and monitor and strengthen the organization's programs. The board's responsibility is to determine which programs are consistent with the organization's key mission and to monitor their effectiveness. The 10th is, and we're going to talk about this in detail in a moment, but the 10th is that the board has an obligation to support the chief executive and assess his or her performance. The board should ensure that the chief executive of the organization has the moral and professional support he or she needs from the board to further the goals of the organization. I want to note that we're going to take questions at the very end. So if you have questions and you're worried that you may not remember the question, please enter them into the chat. Next slide, please. Okay. It's a delicate balance, the board and the chief executive officer. And once again, chief executive officer, that's just a title I gave. It could be, in your organization, it could be called the executive director. In some organizations, the president of the board functions as the CEO. And then there's, in addition to the president, there's a chairman of the board. But what I want to talk about now is, what I want to talk about now is the delicate balance between the board of directors and the top paid professional irrespective of the name you give that top paid professional. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to call him the CEO or her the CEO. The ideal relationship is that it's viewed as a shared responsibility and partnership. I like to say it's similar to the captain of a team. You are both in charge with two different aspects. You're both in charge of different aspects of the team. It should be about trust, respect, and shared vision. The relationship should not be primarily about any kind of conflict, even though conflict may occur. And in that, it's very important in considering the personalities when selecting either a new chairperson, the new head of the board, and by chairperson we mean the chief voluntary officer, selecting that individual. When a board is considering who should be the new chairman of the board, the chief voluntary officer of the organization, you have to consider, will that person get along with the current chief executive officer, the person who's the top paid professional of the organization, or the person who's overseeing and running the day-to-day operations. It's important to make sure that they're to at least try very, very hard to make sure that these are personalities that are going to get along, that they share a common belief system as to how concerning the organization's mission. While the board's primary focus is on the mission and helping to define the organization's present and future, the chief executive is hired to carry out the mission of the organization and the vision of the board of directors. So it's really important that there is this delicate balance back and forth. And while the relationship, and I want to point that this relationship is inherently unbalanced, the board is ultimately the executive's boss. So many times I'll be consulted with by an executive director who says, I want to fire the chairman of the board. I don't get along with them. And I have to point out to that chief executive, you don't fire. You're the top paid professional of the organization. You work for the organization. You report to the board of directors as the top paid professional in the organization, or the person running the day-to-day operations of the organizations. You report to the board of directors, and ultimately the head of the board of directors is the chairman. If there's an issue, I recommend sitting down and talking and speaking about it. And it may be that there may need to be a parting of the ways, and that the board may need to select a new chairman because the CEO and the chairman don't get along. But certainly one has to understand, we need to be very clear here that it's an unbalanced relationship, because even though I've talked about shared responsibility, partnership, you're co-captains of a team, legally the board is ultimately the chief executive officer of the organization boss. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the meeting itself. Let's talk about before the meeting. In my opinion, annual meetings are only as good as the planning that has been done before the meeting. So certainly I would say 2 weeks, 3 weeks, ideally 30 days before the meeting, one should have a planning. The executive director, the CEO, chief executive officer of the organization, should have a planning meeting with the chief voluntary officer of the organization to talk about the meeting. And meetings are for making decisions. So in planning, in part of the planning process, be sure to understand what decisions must be made at this meeting. Very important that the agenda be planned in advance. The board chair and the CEO should ensure that the most important and time-critical decisions are usually placed at the top of the agenda. They're made first because, as often frequently happens, a meeting is set for 90 minutes, and you're going down the agenda and you realize you're not going to finish the agenda. And maybe you've asked people, can you stay later? But maybe people can't stay later. Maybe people have plans. Maybe, and you may not get to everything. You may have to push certain agenda items for the future. So in planning an agenda, I always recommend time-critical decisions, most important matters first. staff reports, which are very important, which we'll talk about, and presentations, from about what the organization is, new programs, etc., and staff presentations. I usually push towards the end of an agenda. I feel and believe it's very important that there be a prior distribution of reports and information. It should not be the first time somebody is reading a financial report on the organization. They show up on the Zoom or they show up at the meeting, and 5 minutes before the Zoom or at the meeting itself, they receive a financial report of the organization. Sufficient time should be given for members of the board to review presentations, to read reports, so that if decisions are going to be made at a meeting, or there's going to be decisions made at a meeting, there's going to be or discussion at a meeting about a particular topic, you have the most informed individuals because they've had the opportunity to read that financial report. They've had the opportunity to read that program evaluation before it's discussed at the meeting, so that there can be an intelligent conversation concerning this. Obviously, there has to be conversation and contact between to any of the presenters, letting them know we're requesting that you present on a particular program. I feel it's a best practice that at every board meeting, you should have a staff presentation. It should not about some aspect, or management presentation about some aspect of the program. It should not be all business where you're talking about finances or a dinner dance or a particular fundraiser coming up. It's always wonderful and always keeps people engaged when you have presenters, but irrespective, everyone that's speaking at the board meeting should know and be confirmed before the meeting. You're speaking at the board meeting. We expect that your presentation will be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or your presentation is going to be 5 minutes and we want to leave 10 minutes for questions, so that individuals, board members, can become engaged. And that, obviously the more engagement at a meeting, what you don't want is your board meeting or your membership meeting to simply be a show and tell, where the chairman of the board or the CEO of the organization, chief executive officer of the organization, gets up there and just speaks. And at the end of the meeting, it basically becomes a show and tell. There's no back and forth. There's no input from board members. That's not the purpose of a board. The board should become engaged and the board should be involved. And the way to do that is at a meeting is to ensure for ample opportunity for board members to be able to question, to ask, to give their input. And we'll talk about that, some of that in a few moments. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about, wrong way. Should be slide 8. At the meeting, thank you. At the meeting. Okay, these are pretty self-explanatory. It's obvious. You should start the meeting at the scheduled time. You don't, in my experience, if the meeting is called for 12 o'clock and you call it for 12:05, I'm sorry, you don't start the meeting till 12:05. The next meeting will be at 12:10. Board members, people, you should be sensitive to people's time. They're volunteers. And if the meeting is called for a specific time, I wouldn't give it more than a 60-second window after the starting time. And if that means board members come late, it'll happen the first time, maybe the second time, it won't happen the third time. It's always important, and don't assume that everyone knows everyone. So it's always important to introduce and to welcome newcomers to the board. Or if there are new staff members who you've invited to make presentations, let's not assume that somebody remembers somebody who was, who may have given a presentation, a year ago, or that's, or if somebody was elected to the board at the last board meeting, maybe a board member wasn't there and doesn't know that person. So it's always important to do an introduction and welcome. I think it's always important, similar to what I hope to have done in the beginning of this presentation, was to summarize a little bit about what we're going to discuss. I think it's important at the beginning of a meeting to also summarize and to what's going to be discussed at the meeting, so people know what to expect. I think it's important. If there's a lot of issues you might want to say to be discussed, a lot of agenda items, you might want to say at the beginning of the meeting, We have a full agenda today, which means we are going to be limiting some discussion on certain items, and we may not get to everything today. And if we don't get to everything today, we'll schedule another meeting. Maybe we'll have a committee meeting. Maybe we'll have another opportunity for people to continue the discussion. I think it's important during the meeting not to let the discussion wander off. You should stick to the agenda. In my experience, having attended hundreds and hundreds of board meetings and membership meetings, if you stick to the agenda, it usually goes fairly smoothly. If you don't stick to the agenda and somebody says, well, I want to raise the following topic, and you go on to that topic, you may never get back to your agenda. You may completely get sidelined. What you do when that happens is you say, John, thank you so much. That's a great item. Let's add that to the agenda for the end of the meeting. And let's see if we have time to discuss it then. And if not, we'll make sure we discuss it at another meeting. It's important as for both the CEO and the chairman, the chief voluntary officer of the organization, who should be running the meeting. I should have said that to begin with. The chief voluntary officer of the organization, consistent with your organization's governing documents, should be the individual running the meeting. But I believe it's the responsibility of both the CEO and the chief voluntary officer to watch for signs that a discussion or debate has run its course. In other words, that it's been discussed and people are just starting to repeat themselves. I think that it's important for the chief voluntary officer to then summarize the discussion, and then, if necessary, call for the vote. At some point, you can discuss something till, forever and ever and ever. At some point, you just need to stop the discussion and say, I think we've discussed this enough. Let's call for the vote. Let's have a vote on the issue, or even better yet, I think we've reached consensus on the issue. We can now move to the next agenda item. And if we have more time later on, we'll go back and we can continue the discussion in terms of that. I think it's important to be alert to nonverbal behavior. If somebody's in the board meeting and they're like this the whole time, they're obviously not engaged, or maybe they're dissenting. They're giving you cues that, and I know it's harder on Zoom. When we do board meetings on Zoom, and at least when I'm involved, I counsel very strongly if it's a smaller board, meaning under 25 people or under. I counsel, or usually even smaller. I counsel very strongly that cameras must be on during the board meeting, because you want to make sure that people are engaged, and you can tell a lot if somebody is just by their nonverbal gestures. And if somebody looks like they're upset, or they're just, like waving their head back and forth, you might want to say, it seems like you're not happy with what's being discussed. John, can you express, for everyone here, exactly what you're feeling. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. I like the use of what's called a consent agenda. A consent agenda is used to dispense quickly with routine and non-controversial items. Here's a perfect example. I have a client who receives a lot of city contracts. Those city contracts for the social services programs that this particular nonprofit runs require board approval for many of the contracts. The client used to go through each one of these items and have a vote. A vote of the board approving of the government contract. What we recommended, and now the client's doing it, and it's cut out a lot of time and a lot of frustration on, in terms of board meetings, is the use of a consent agenda. A consent agenda is usually sent out prior to the board meeting to the members of the board, and it says, at the board meeting, we plan on presenting the following items for review and approval of the board. And then it could start off with saying the minutes from the last meeting, see attached. Contract from the New York City Department for the Aging in the amount of $25,000 for social services program XYZ, see attached. Contract from the state of New York, see attached. And then at the meeting itself, the chief voluntary officer simply says, I'm now going to ask for discussion on the consent agenda and approval of the consent agenda. Does anyone have any item on the consent agenda which they wish to discuss? 9 out of 10 times, there'll be no response or the answer will be no. In which case, the chief voluntary officer then says, great, I will now entertain a motion that we should approve the items in the consent agenda. There's a motion, there's a second, I second the motion, and all of the items that might have taken you 25 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever it is, to have gone through, you've now gone through in 2 minutes. Now, what happens if somebody says, I don't quite understand that contract from the New York City Department for the Aging. I didn't even know we're doing that. I really would like to know more about that. I didn't know we're doing that type of program. Then what you do is you say, thank you very much. We're going to remove that item from the consent agenda. We're going to add it to today's agenda, and you discuss that separately. So you've approved everything else on the consent agenda, which could include approval of the minutes from the last board meeting. You know, whatever the items are, you approve all of those, and you've segregated out that one item that, for whatever reason, somebody on the board would like to discuss separately. Okay. Rules of order are important, and you just heard some of the rules of order, which I just gave an example of. A rule of order is the proper procedure that your organization is going to follow to make sure that decisions are made fairly, and that the rights of majorities on the board, and if there are minorities on the board, are completely protected. Now, some boards, and I generally recommend that organizations roughly follow what we call the old Robert's Rules of Order, but you're not required to. The fact that I said, before I make a motion to approve the consent agenda, I second the motion to approve the consent agenda, and then the chief voluntary officer says, all in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Or if you're on Zoom, sometimes we use the little hands that go up and down. All opposed. And then the chief voluntary officer says the consent agenda has been approved, and you move on to the next item. That is a formal way of doing this. I call that the Robert's Rules of Order, and I do recommend the use of that, but you don't have to do that. Many boards, I'll get phone calls sometimes or do consultations, and I'll look at the minutes, and the minutes will say the board agreed upon, or the board decided, and or everyone on the board but 2 people. It's okay. That's okay, as long as you have a process, and you're allowing people to vote, and you're allowing people to express their opinion. It isn't necessarily required. You haven't done anything wrong. You have not done anything wrong if you haven't said, I move that this be approved. I second that this be approved. In smaller organizations, and indeed even in some larger organizations, I generally find that most items at a board meeting, whether it's to hire somebody or to approve a budget or whatever the item may be, are generally approved by consensus. Which is why when I look at a lot of minutes of meetings, which we'll talk about a little bit further, into this presentation, it'll say the board decided, and that's okay. Those types of minutes are completely fine. Okay, it's very important if you want to have an engaged board, and you want board members to come back, that you encourage everyone to contribute. At every board member to contribute. What I like to do is called keeping a speakers list. I literally have, I recommend that the chief voluntary officer jots down on a sheet of paper or whatever it is, everyone that's attending that meeting. And as each person makes a comment or speaks or makes a motion or does something, you put a little check next to their name. That way, at the end of the meeting, everyone has had the opportunity, and everyone has, in fact, participated at the meeting. It's a good practice if it's a complicated meeting or on a larger board, that before something is approved at the meeting, that the secretary of the organization reads it again. So especially imagine the scenario where you've discussed whether or not to lease space in Brooklyn. Should we move our organization from Queens to Brooklyn? And you've had a conversation, that's gone on 25, 30 minutes after the motion was made. Somebody makes a motion. I move that we move the headquarters of the organization from Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn to Dyer Avenue in the Bronx, whatever it is. after 20 or 30 minutes of discussing back and forth, people may actually have forgotten what are we deciding now? So I think it's important that if there's a long conversation on a particular topic and something is going to be voted upon, that the secretary of the organization read again to everyone present what the vote is going to be on. Okay. Now, if people are signing up for and volunteering to do various things, it's important to keep a list of those so that and at the end of the meeting to ensure everyone understands their assigned tasks. It's also important that all of those items are written in the minutes of the meeting. So if by way of example, I'm at a board meeting and since I have some legal skills and I volunteer to check the title on a particular property that the organization is looking to move into or to buy, that the minutes reflect Yisroel Shulman volunteered at the meeting to check title on the property that the organization, that the organization, is considering purchasing. Or somebody asks a staff member who's given a presentation, how many clients did you serve at your Borough Park office? And the staff member who gave the presentation said, I don't have that information here. Okay, then, and the board member says, well, I'd like to have that. Okay, we're going to get that to you. You want to write it down. Staff member, agreed to provide, the board with a number of participants or clients serviced at the Borough Park office. Very important. I never leave a meeting without confirming the next meeting date. That way, everyone has it in the calendar. I often find that it's easier to if you have to select a date for the next meeting, most everyone hopefully is at the meeting. It's easier than sending around a calendar invite, and to actually get confirmation on when the next meeting date will be. I also feel it's important to be very respectful of people's time and to end the meeting on time. If the meeting is called for 7 to 8 and it's 5 minutes to 8 and you still have 3 agenda items, the respectful thing, in my opinion, is for the chief voluntary officer, the person that's running the meeting, to say, it looks like we're not going to have enough time to finish everything. Can people stay longer? And if somebody can't stay longer, then unfortunately you have to adjourn the meeting. We'll have to either pick another date to continue or push those items to the next agenda. But I think it's very important to respect people's time. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about after the meeting. I think it's important after the meeting to review what I call the at-meeting checklist, and identify, how the meeting went, and were there things that could be done at the next meeting to improve the meeting. This is a conversation that should occur between the CVO, the Chief Voluntary Officer, who should have been running the meeting, and the CEO, the top paid professional of the organization. What are the action items? Because you want to make sure that you're fulfilling everything that was everything that was represented to the board that you promised to do in the interim is being done. And also, how'd the board meeting go? Are there ways that we can make the board meeting better? It's important, I believe, to email minutes from the meeting. I think that it's important to do so. I like to do it twice. I usually recommend doing it within 2 weeks, no longer than 30 days after the meeting. I also like the minutes to be done before the next meeting. I think they should get them twice. Email minutes and also any materials distributed during the meeting. Now, today, that's really more for an in-person meeting, because a lot of meetings which are held by Zoom, the materials, hopefully, if were distributed before the last meeting. But if they haven't been, and it's not a bad idea, it really is not a bad idea when you're emailing the minutes and if the minutes describe a presentation from Sam Jones on the operations of the Borough Park office, and Sam Jones had a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation or a written report, even if that written report was sent to the board before the meeting, as I recommended it be done, so that intelligent questions and intelligent discussion can be had. I think it's a good idea when emailing the minutes to re-email all the materials distributed and or that were discussed during the meeting. If a specific board member, I said in my example before, I said that Yisroel Shulman volunteered to check the title on a particular property the corporation is considering purchasing, then I think it's important to email that either the CVO, the Chief Voluntary Officer, or the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, should send an email to each board member, reminding them, thanking them, of course, for their participation at the meeting, and reminding them of the assignment that they agreed to do. I also think it's important for either the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, or the CVO, the Chief Voluntary Officer, to contact board members who did not attend, and especially if they said they were going to attend, and brief them in person. I would do it after the minutes are sent. So if the minutes are sent 2 weeks after meeting, and I didn't attend the board meeting, I would recommend that the CVO or the CEO contact me and say, you weren't at the meeting, we sent you the minutes, I want to know if you have any questions. It's a way of keeping board members engaged. What happens in my experience is that a board member that misses one meeting and then may miss a second meeting, they get in the practice of missing meetings, and you become unengaged, and then it's harder to get them to become re-engaged. That's why having that 10-minute conversation in between can go a long way in keeping that board member engaged. Next slide, please. I call these, so 8 quick ways that I put together how to improve a board meeting. So name tag. Okay, I'm giving my age here a little bit. So I know that a lot of meetings are held held virtually. I think but if the meeting is in person, I think it's important that unless it's a very small group and you're 100% certain that everyone knows everyone, name tags. There's nothing worse than sitting, and I've experienced this myself, sitting next to somebody who I've seen them at 3 board meetings. I just can't remember their name. And, hey, or you try to avoid the name. I think it's very important that there be name tags, either name tags on your lapel, name tags in front of the person. And it's particularly true when I actually prefer, if it's an in-person meeting, the table placards that have the name. And I put them on for everyone, including the staff members there. It just avoids embarrassment, and it just makes everyone feel more comfortable. If it's a virtual meeting, I ask everyone, to make sure that it's not just the first name up there, that it's a first and last name up there. And if it's a management or a staff member of the organization, not only does it say their name, but it says their position. CFO, CIO, development officer. So that way people understand, because they may have heard presentations from this person a year ago. They may not remember, that Sally Smith, was hired as the chief development officer of the organization. I also feel, having had a lot of experience at board meetings where there's a lot of lingo in the social services and human services world. And, the chief voluntary officer talks about the CDBG or the DV grant, without realizing that not everyone in the room knows that CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grants, or DV is an acronym for domestic violence. So what I will do is I will actually recommend either on the Zoom, on the Zoom slide, so to speak, on the side, or at an actual meeting, that there be an acronym chart for social services agencies that have a lot of lingo. And they talk about, they do a lot of work with DFTA. So I've attended meetings. I've literally attended meetings where an hour into the meeting, all they've talked about is DFTA. An hour into the meeting, somebody raises their hand and says, "I'm embarrassed to say, but I don't know what DFTA is," but they do know what the New York City Department for the Aging is. So that's why it sounds silly, but I think, not assuming that acronym that everyone understands our lingo, is not accurate. I think that I call it an anticipated action for each agenda item. So what I mean by that is, here's an example. Let's say there is there's going to be a report on volunteer recruitment for the organization. I generally recommend it be done on the copy that the copy of the agenda that the chief voluntary officer has, or the CEO has what I call the action item. What do you hope to get from that? After the presentation on voluntary recruitment for the organization, what's the action item? The action item is we want to form a committee of 3 or 4 board members to discuss how to get more volunteers for the organization. Or, after the finance committee report, we want to have, we want to form, the action item is we want to approve the annual budget for the next year. I don't write that down. It's kind of like it's really an annotated budget that both the chief voluntary officer has and the CEO, chief executive officer, has next to each agenda item. If there's a follow-up, you hope that and it reminds you. I've had situations where a board has gone through and discussed an important state grant, and they did everything except for vote on the approval of the state grant. And they then had to go back and have another meeting or send around unanimous written resolutions simply because they had a long discussion on it. But when asked by the state for a board resolution or for minutes of a meeting showing that the actual state grant was approved, they didn't do that. They did everything but. They had the presentation. And that's why I feel having an action item, having a separate agenda that the CEO and the CVO have that says what the follow-up is for that. Okay. I also feel, as I said before, that that it's important to make sure each person speaks at least once, and that's why I like, as I mentioned before, having a speakers list. I feel very important that during presentations from staff that it's a better board meeting if you've left. I would rather cut the staff presentation down to 3 minutes and leave 6 minutes for board members to be able to ask questions. It's important to encourage all questions. No such thing as a dumb question. Obviously, people have to be respectful. When there's dissent back and forth, it sounds silly, but it's important that the room is comfortable. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's the right size. Attended a board meeting about a month ago in Brooklyn. There were 30 people stuffed in a conference room that an organization had loaned that really held 15 people. It was uncomfortable. People could not wait to get out of the meeting. So it's important to make sure that everyone is comfortable. I believe that if it's an in-person meeting, offering beverages and perhaps something light as cookies or fruit is a good idea. I'm not a big believer in having meetings where people are eating their lunch during the meeting. If it's a lunch meeting, what I like to recommend is you have your lunch, or a dinner meeting, you have your dinner first. The dinner is over, people can socialize, and then you run the meeting. Because what you don't want is people going up and down to the buffet line, grabbing food while somebody is making a presentation. It can become very distracting for everyone. As I mentioned before, I think it's important to adjourn the meeting, meaning to end the meeting on time, or that there should be general consensus to agree to stay later. Next slide, please. Here's what I call key don'ts. And as mentioned in the chat, all of this will be available. I don't know, certainly within a short time period after the meeting. So I don't believe in lecturing a board. I don't believe it's a show and tell. I believe it's a back and forth. That is as a key don't lecture the board. I think it's important that if you have members of the board who are involved in a particular project, maybe you have a committee on the Borough Park office, the social services provide there. I think it's important for the staff members to work with that board member to be able to, in the ideal situation, to give a report on the program that they are involved with. I think it's important to what you don't have is you don't have go from one report to another without the opportunity for people to be able to ask questions, for people to be able to because that's the way you get people engaged. It shouldn't just be one report after another. I believe that it is legally and ethically and morally, you have to you ensure that you financial information, if it's going to be discussed at a board meeting, is provided to the board before the board meeting. So another key don't is failure to provide accessible financial information. Key don't, as we discussed before, don't allow members to chat about irrelevant matters. Keep the agenda focused. You can let members discuss day-to-day operations, but not unless it's involved, with some strategic decision that the agenda item. So what's discussed at the meeting by board members should be related to the agenda item. Also, you don't allow somebody to hijack a meeting. And that can be done in a number of different ways. Somebody can hijack the meeting just because they're speaking too much, then other people aren't getting the opportunity to speak, in which case you politely say, thank you so much for the comment. Now, is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment on that? Or let's move on. Sometimes you have to be a little forceful when it comes to that. Next items. Next slide, please. I too am cognizant of the time. I realize I have 8 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through all this on time because I would like to leave, some time for questions afterwards. Key do's. Some of this is repeat. Start and end on time. Make sure everyone knows one another. The board chair leads the meeting. Chief voluntary officer. It is not the job of the chief paid of the CEO or the executive director if they're paid to lead the meeting. I believe the best practice that we discussed before is to disseminate the board materials. I think 7 days in advance. If it's an in-person meeting, have extra copies on hand because people show up to the meeting without copies. I think it's important that it sets the tone for the meeting, that the board chair, when they open the meeting, that the board chair of the meeting open the meeting by thanking members who have made special contributions. Maybe they, thank you for chairing a fundraising event. Thank you for introducing us to these potential donors, or thank you for suggesting this program, or thank you for attending these programs, etc. Let's go on. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, address routine matters at the beginning. The consent agenda, the minutes of the meeting. I think that's really all should be done at the beginning of the meeting. The CEO and the chair should both make presentations, brief presentations. CEO's focus should be on the organization's progress and its goals, where the organization is in terms of what it seeks to accomplish, what adjustments have or need to be made, key external forces that relate to how the organization is operating. The chair's comments should focus on the role of the board and how the board can help to advance the organization. Let's form a committee on our Borough Park operation to see how we can, help to enhance the services provided there. Or let's form a marketing committee to see how we can help to work with the staff to help promote the image of the organization in the community so that people know more about the organization, and maybe that will help with fundraising for the organization. I think it's important that in either the CEO's report or the chair's report that someone or a staff member, somebody should at this meeting remind the board of the mission of the organization, and at least one report during the organization should focus on some kind of firsthand story on what the organization, has on what the organization has impacted somebody or has impacted a community. The chair concludes the meeting, thanking the board members for attending, and of course, announcing date, time, and location of the next meeting. It's important that at each meeting, fundraising and development should at least be mentioned, how the organization is doing in terms of its fundraising. We had a goal this year for a budget of $250,000, and we're on goal to reach that. Or we're not on goal to reach that, and as a result of not being able to reach that target amount, we have decided to adjust and to cut back on a particular program or to do a program in a different way. Next slide, please. I'll just read this. The meeting's fundamental goal is to have members engage in a key strategic issue, or if that's what the meeting is about, or something dealing with the organization, and then leave more deeply educated either about that issue or the organization as a whole, and inspired by the organization's work. Next slide, please. In 2 minutes, I just want to, just as a little side thing, I just think it's important that board members must be able to read and understand your financial statements in order to fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities. That's why it's important that the financial statements and each board on an annual basis must approve the budget of the organization going forward and should approve the financial statements, whether or not it's a QuickBooks report or a compilation done by an accountant or audited financial statements done by an accountant. The board should approve that. At the annual meeting. And minimal information. I'm always asked this question. The minimal information, and we can have another session, or you can send me an email. You'll have my contact information in a few moments. I don't mind answering questions. I enjoy it. If somebody wants to email me, I'm happy to answer a question. But minimal financial information include the balance sheet, an income statement. Those are the two minimal. I also think that there should be what's called a variance statement, and that shows what was budgeted and what the actual number is. So if you budgeted in 2024 for $5,000 for food for events and you actually spent $4,500, I think it's helpful for a board to see it in two different columns. Next slide, please. These are just definitions that are commonly found in financial statements, whether it's a QuickBooks or an accountant's report. Assets are things we own, liabilities are things we owe. Net assets, the difference between assets and liabilities. Income, just exactly what it sounds from, exactly what it sounds. Expenses, and then financial results. Next slide, please. Thank you for joining us. So I was pretty good to 12:58, and I will turn it over to Amy or Ina from Nonprofit Help Desk to. Should I answer questions now, or do we have time?
Absolutely. You do have a question waiting for you from Valerie, who
Hi, Valerie.
asks, is it okay to have members who may have a specific insight or skill the organization needs to be invited to the board meetings? All members are all members invited to the general membership meetings?
So Valerie, I'm assuming we're talking about a membership corporation as opposed to a non-membership corporation. A membership corporation is an organization that has members who then elect the board of directors. A non-membership organization does not have members. They only have board of directors, and the board of directors on an annual basis or on a periodic basis re-elects itself. So, but in answer to your question, if you're a membership organization, unless your bylaws, your governing documents prohibit it, no, it's completely fine to invite members of the organization to be, to make presentations to the board members, to be, to perhaps either jointly or on their own with staff who are involved, paid staff who are involved in a particular program. But that's commonly done, and it's encouraged. It's encouraged, and many organizations have what they call open board meetings, and that's, again, this is all determined by your governing documents. An open board meeting would be that you have a board meeting, but it's open for the members of the organization to come and watch and to view what's going on. And sometimes, depending upon the structure of the organization, at the end of the board meeting, they'll actually allow for community or membership questions, or of the board, or membership input and participation. Amy or Valerie, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. That was
You're
very
very
good.
welcome.
Thank you.
Next question.
It doesn't look like we have any others, though we have a relatively small group at this point. So if anyone wants to come off of mute to ask one last question.
Please do.
Hi, I just want to know, on the website, you said the recording will be posted. What about the slides?
Yes.
Slides and video will both be posted at nphd.org. And Mushki, I think you had a question as well.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to know, how do you suppose communicating to the board their full responsibilities? Meaning, this is a beautiful presentation for me, and I learn a lot, but what is the best way to communicate to a board all this?
So earlier on in the presentation, we talked about board orientation. I believe it's important, as part of a board orientation, either to, at a minimum, to provide written materials which are available from the website of the New York State Attorney General's office, New York Lawyers Alliance, other entities where that talk about board member responsibilities. So at a minimum, I think it's important to provide written materials to new board members, especially particularly if they've never been on a board before, about what are the key responsibilities of a board member. You could require, and some boards do, some boards as part of the orientation or recruitment process require the watching and the viewing of a video, such as the one today, to talk about, where board members can hear about, at least, in a 55-minute session, what are the key responsibilities of a board member. I think that that's the key way of doing it. Other boards, have actually invited and are paid for outside trainers to come to a board meeting as part of a board training, to train board members on board members' responsibility, to refamiliarize board members on board member responsibilities. Some organizations will have what they call a semi-annual or an annual board retreat, where the board members get together informally to talk about what it means to be on the board. They may talk about organizational things as well, but usually a board retreat will talk about what it means to be on the board and responsibilities. So there are a number of different ways to ensure that board members are fully informed, or at least have more information on what it means to be a board member. And I think that's probably a service that you can actually, that the Nonprofit Help Desk might be able to help a nonprofit with, board trainings and or providing materials for boards to be able to familiarize themselves with their responsibilities.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Schulman, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for
pleasure.
joining today. Please do visit us at nphd.org to see some other workshops that we have coming up, past workshops, to request one-on-one support. And thank you all again for joining today. Have a great day.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Very good presentation.